Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at CanWCC's Spring Town Hall, Canada's missing major project. A strong nation needs care, not just concrete. When we think about nation building in Canada, we often think about housing, transportation, transit, and infrastructure. But today's conversation asks a different question. What happens when one of the country's most essential forms of infrastructure, care, remains economically invisible? Today, we're going to explore the realities of caregiving and the economic impact of unpaid labor and what it would look like to build a country that truly values care. To start, I want to introduce to you CanWCC, or formerly the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce. We operate out of the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee people, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in what is colonially known as Toronto, Ontario. The Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce is the first and only chamber of commerce that fills a critical gap in Canada's business ecosystem by championing those who are often excluded from traditional chambers and overlooked in economic policy, providing its members with community, connection, and advocacy to advance gender and economic equity. But before we move on to our first speaker and the reason why you're here, we just like to take a moment to hear from all of you. We're going to launch a quick audience poll, and the question is, on average, how many hours of unpaid care do you typically do in a day? And when we say unpaid care, I want to specify unpaid care work, we mean things like childcare, caregiving for family members, emotional support, household labor, coordinating appointments and responsibilities, and of course, invisible work that keeps the daily life of functioning, or the daily life functioning in general. As you answer, I really encourage you to think about everything that often goes unaccounted for or unrecognized. And I'm just going to share the results. It looks like only 9% of you do not perform unpaid care work. That thing that says quite a lot. And I do want to mention that 42% of Canadians provide unpaid care work. So those numbers tell us something important, and even the numbers that are here today. Care is not a niche issue. It is shaping people's health, their careers, their financial stability, and their ability to participate fully in the economy every single day. But despite its scale and economic impact, care work remains largely invisible in how we build or how we think about national priorities or how we think about nation building. But that's why we're having this conversation. To really introduce this topic, it is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Nancy Wilson. She is the founder and CEO of the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce. She is a chartered professional accountant with more than a decade of experience in accounting, business advisory, and entrepreneurship. Nancy founded CanWCC in 2018 out of frustration with the systemic barriers and the lack of support facing women business owners in Canada. But since then, she has become a powerful voice for economic equity, financial literacy, and bold policy change. Nancy is also the author of Canada's Missing Major Project, National Care Economy Strategy, the proposal that CanWCC recently submitted to the Major Projects Office, and the reason why we're all here today. So please join me in welcoming Nancy Olson.
Thank you so much, Lise, and thank you to everyone who's joining this call, spending this time with us on this Thursday afternoon. I know so many people across Canada are really passionate about this issue, and we at CanWCC are not the only folks spending time and resources campaigning for greater policy attention, greater investment towards the care economy. So I have a short presentation about the Missing Major Projects proposal. And so for those of you who haven't read it or are not familiar with it, last week, CanWCC released a proposal that makes the case for a national care economy strategy and to be authorized as a major project, a major nation building project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of walk you through it at a high level, and then I'm going to give you some information about the camp, what we've done with the proposal, and what we're planning to do with it going forward, and how we're going to campaign for some real policy action. All right. So the proposal makes a case for, as I said, a national care strategy to be adopted by the Major Projects Office as a major project. Um, it makes an economic case, an equity case, and then the policy case. The economic case is clear. Care work in Canada is already a major economic driver. It is actually the the sorry, 25% or 1 in 4 of Canadian workers are actually employed in healthcare or social services, which is the dominant, the first or primary sector in which all Canadian workers are employed. We have a lot of folks employed in the care industry, and yet we need more. So there is a gap and a labor shortage within paid care employment. Paid care work in health and education actually contribute 12% of our GDP. So it's a significant economic contributor. And yet, as I said, we need more. Our population is aging, and as we saw during COVID, there are some real gaps and some real fragility in the systems we have in place. Okay, here we go. The equity case. So, because unpaid care work falls so disproportionately on women, it actually has a real preventative effect on their economic participation in the labor force, which also prevents them from generating income. And so it has a real effect on, gender and economic equity. What's interesting is when you look at self-employed women versus self-employed men, and you look at what the Major Projects Office has prioritized, self-employed women are concentrated in healthcare and social services. 20% of all self-employed women are employed in healthcare and social services versus only 6% of self-employed men. 20% of self-employed men, the most self-employed men, are focused and employed in the construction industry versus 3% of self-employed women. So there's a real kind of balance, but divide between the genders when you look at self-employed women and men. Then when you look at the 2025 budget and investment in sectors, you see the Major Projects Office really focusing on big investment in physical infrastructure. And you can see how this plays out when you look at the GBA, or gender-based analysis of the 2025 budget. And the gender-based analysis shows that fiscal initiatives in the 2025 budget that will benefit men predominantly add up to 65 billion in the 2025 budget. When you look at those fiscal initiatives in the 2025 budget that benefit predominantly women, it comes in at 3 billion. So we need to balance out the investment in infrastructure, and we need to balance out the investment in sectors where women and men are predominantly employed and find and choose to start their businesses. But as we're saying, healthcare and the health economy is not treated as a major project. It's treated as an operating expenditure. That means that investment or spending in the healthcare economy is limited by tax revenues, and it's generally underfunded, undervalued, and fragmented, um, which perpetuates the problem. When you look at a national care work strategy and what is defined as a major project, the Major Projects Office was established in 2025. It was created under a piece of legislation called the Building Canada Act. And it was specifically created to coordinate complex cross-jurisdictional nation building projects. And although those projects to date have been limited to physical assets, the criteria of what makes a project a nation building project doesn't specify physical infrastructure. The criteria as set out in the Building Canada Act certainly makes it possible to argue that a national care economy can meet the definition of a nation building project. And this is the evidence that was put out in the proposal. So fundamentally, why is a major project status so important? Number one, we believe it's important because it is a declaration of the value that this government and our country in general is placing on care and the care work economy. It is a signal from above, literally the powers that be, that there is value to care work, and it is also a declaration of priority. It is the powers that be, the federal government is saying we need to prioritize care work and we are putting it at the front of the line because we know it's valuable and we know that it is something that needs to be prioritized. And finally, it's important because making something an infrastructure investment changes how it can be financed. Public expenditure, or current expenditures or operational expenditures, as I said, are limited by current tax revenues. Infrastructure investments can be financed through borrowing, or essentially the government can increase the deficit in order to invest in infrastructure, because the rationale is these infrastructure investments will yield a return on that investment. And so increasing the deficit is justified. And so if we don't put the care economy into this infrastructure nation building category, it is going to continue to be underfunded and underprioritized. And the Major Projects Office coordination makes sense. The Major Projects Office, if you read the legislation, it's a perfect project for the Major Projects Office. Care work in the care economy is fragmented across multiple systems, delivery mechanisms, the provinces and territories, the federal infrastructure. Coordination of all of these fragmented public-private systems is exactly the type of coordination mechanism that the Major Projects Office was created to facilitate. So there's my pitch. I suspect I'm speaking to an already converted audience, But that's essentially the argument that's made in the proposal that was released. The good news is the report itself has been downloaded as of today over 320 times. Um, and uh, as of last Tuesday, it has been submitted to the Major Projects Office for consideration. So what's the next step? So the next step is we have created an e-petition on the House of Commons petition site. What we are still looking for is to get an MP to sponsor the e-petition. I have a meeting with an MP next week who is part of the caregiving or care economy caucus. I'm going to speak to him about sponsoring the petition. Once we get an MP to sponsor it, it will be posted publicly. Then we need to get 500 signatures to the e-petition. I don't think that's going to be a problem. Once we get the 500 signatures, the petition is referred to the Privy Council office, and the government must respond within 45 calendar days. And responses to petitions that make it to that stage are tabled in the House as sessional papers. So, regardless of the response we get, this issue is going to be on the record, and we are going to keep pushing for policy change, for prioritizing this issue, and as as a collective, we're not going to let this die on the vine. So that is the proposal and the campaign. What I'm really happy to share with you today is we have a blockbuster panel of CanWCC members and other folks who do, I do policy. I love policy. I'll stay up all night and write a report and read research. These folks are on the front lines. They're involved in the care work economy. And so I'm really honored to welcome our three speakers. Susie Burpee is the Executive Director of Balancing Act Canada, a national nonprofit advancing equity for artists and arts workers, parents, and caregivers. Through advocacy and policy development, she has helped transform arts workplaces into more caregiver-inclusive environments. Crystal Troop is an Anishinaabe death worker, educator, and founder of Blackbird Medicines. Through her work, she supports communities navigating grief, ceremony, caregiving, and Indigenous knowledge systems connected to birth, death, and healing. Janice Goldmintz is the founder of Talk About Aging and a speaker specializing in caregiving, aging, and workplace culture. Drawing on both professional experience and personal experience, she helps organizations understand the hidden impact caregiving has on careers and daily life. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. So our conversation today is going to be very unstructured, very informal, because that's what caregiving is all about. You make a plan and it's gone by breakfast. So as a jumping off point, what I'd like each of you on the panel to do is just reflect a bit on how has caregiving shaped your personal and professional life, and what do you wish more people understood about the care economy? So we'll start with you, Susie.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks for having me. Thanks, CanWCC, for this incredibly important advocacy work. I'm coming to you today from Toronto, Tuggeranto, on the territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Mississaugas of the Credit. And Nancy prepared us so well that I actually wrote my intro so that I can stick to time, Nancy. So I'm just so pleased to be here. My name is Susie Burpee, and I'm currently the Executive Director of Balancing Act Canada, which is a national nonprofit that aims to advance access to employment for artists and arts workers who are also caregivers. So I'm going to speak to Balancing Act in a few moments, but I wanted to mention first and foremost that I'm a mother to two children, a teen and a tween. And I'm also a caregiver to my parents. And as well, I'm part of a kinship circle of care for a former employer who was the artistic director of a dance company that I danced with. So I was a professional dancer and choreographer for over 25 years. And as you know, the arts and culture sector is largely a sector of self-employment, of short-term contract work. And my professional dance life, like many artists' lives, were managed entirely by myself. I did all my own administrative work. I booked my own gigs and was responsible for my training and professional development. I used to make a joke that the dress code for being an artist was that you had to wear a backpack because a typical day would look like moving from teaching class in the morning to going to a production rehearsal in the afternoon to grant writing late into the night. And I had what I'd call a successful career. There were awards and consistent work, albeit it was gig work. But I did experience many of the systemic conditions of the arts sector that challenge work-life balance and any notions of parenting and caregiving. So lots of travel and touring, late nights in the theater, rehearsals on evenings and weekends. And these conditions are not siloed to the performing arts, they're cross-discipline. So think late night film sets or musicians on tour, and a fair amount of stigma around being available to work. You're only as good as your last gig. The arts are doing a lot of work to become more inclusive, to become kinder, to work with folks, and Balancing Act is a part of that. So I'm excited to share the transition from my work as a self-employed artist to this Balancing Act work. Essentially, I hit the pandemic, and like most artists, mothers, women, I was the lower earner. So I stayed home with the kids, and I just couldn't see a way forward. And it really lit a fire under me in terms of thinking about systemic barriers to work. And so I started writing and researching, and it led me to the founder of Balancing Act, who's a theater maker, Lisa Marie DiLiberto. And I've been with the organization now since 2021. And with some significant federal investment, we've been able to work with over 150 arts organizations across the country who are all piloting some kind of care-centered practice that supports caregivers in their network. And of course, those caregivers are largely contract workers. So this looks like anything from flexible work to a short-term compassion fund that might allow them to take taxis home to their aging parents at the end of the day. And I think about this and I think about, wow, just my experiences. And, there were many of folks who inspired me to have a family while continuing to be an artist, but also a lot of folks who had to do a lot of work, who had to bring their kids physically into dance class because there was nowhere else for them to go, because daycare was too pricey, because, your babysitting canceled out what you made. So all of these things is what, Balancing Act is looking to address. How can we keep key talent in the field? How can we keep, largely women and gender diverse people who are the unpaid care workers who are dovetailing with their artistic work? How can we keep them in the field and even advance them, let their careers thrive and flourish? So I guess I want to say, this is why I'm so pleased to be here today, because some of the work that we're doing is has been, on the shoulders of organizations and has been really impactful. So workplace policies and practices, piloted by arts organizations, changing the way that they're engaging with their employees. It's amazing. But some of the work really needs to be done at the big P governmental policy level. And so, balancing act now 5 years in, we feel ready to step into allyship and advocacy around this big P policy. So I look forward to speaking to it. But just to say, and I can drop this data in the chat later, but the arts and culture sector in 2024 contributed 65 billion in direct GDP to the economy. And this supports more jobs per dollar than other key sectors like oil and gas, manufacturing, or agriculture. So when we're looking at different ways to view economic components, I think we're really aligned with what you're speaking to, Nancy, with this MPO. And someone put in the chat, like care work accounts for unpaid care work accounts for up to like 35 to 40% of the GDP as well. So as an artist, those are huge contributions. As an artist caregiver, those are huge contributions. And so we want to stay in this conversation because there's been the labor of mothers and parents and caregivers, is foundational, not peripheral to our economy and our cultural life. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
giving me space and pass it back to you.
Thank you so much. And I, before I move on to Crystal, I do just want to recognize, and there could be more than I know, but I did want to recognize two important people on the call who have done so much work around childcare, and that's Sue Colley and Martha Friendly. So CanWCC supports the groups that are working so hard around childcare, and just wanted to give a hats off to those folks as well as the organizations that they run. Next up, Crystal, I'd love to hear your reflections.
Oh, Chimigwech. I'll just introduce myself as we're taught to do in our communities, Nadishnakaz Debajnu Benisi. So my spiritual name is Story Healing Thunderbird, and that is a name that came out of my care work. As a caregiver, my personal experience has blended in and out with my professional over the years. But certainly caregiving has shaped me and my life. So as a First Nations woman, a member of the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation, I had been impacted by caregiving and shifts and large social implications to the care I received. In ways, I was impacted in ways that I didn't understand until I was an adult, like so many of us. So my personal experience with lived experience with caregiving, I'm the oldest daughter, I'm the oldest granddaughter, like so many of our families. That is really the key ingredients, the oldest child to be, your introduction to care work. And for myself, I found care work as a mode of success. I started out pet sitting, house sitting, childcare work very young. I've been working since I was 9 years old. And I did a lot of childcare all through my high school years and certainly caring for my siblings and things like that. In my high school years, I transitioned into offering care for people at end of life. I got myself a summer work, evening, weekend work in a long-term care facility. And at 16 and 17, I was looking after 9 elderly people by myself, feeding them all their meals, their medications, their cleaning and care needs, and their entertainment. And so for me, caring for the older and the younger started to really blend together. And that's where my professional journey took me. And that's where I still find my groove is offering care on the spectrum of life. Um, as a someone who considers themselves a death worker, a birth worker, a plant worker, a land-based care practitioner, I'm someone who has found a lot of inspiration from my own navigational experiences I first became street involved and homeless at age 12. And so learning to navigate systems for my own care became essential to my survival. And that's the kind of spirit that I've taken into caring for others, including my own children. Um, and certainly seeing the challenges of caring for older family members or supporting family members caring for their older family members. It's been a really long journey, understanding how much navigational exhaustion can come into factor and how much unpaid care work we really do. For my children, you know, becoming a mother is what helped me reach new levels of caregiving for myself, but also understanding how much unpaid work we're doing in harmony with that. So my advocacy work, leadership work has gone, it started out as a young parent, and I worked with public health to raise awareness around teen pregnancy and the realities of caregiving, what that looks like as a teen parent who is choosing to parent, to have the abortion, to have adoption. What are those options like? All the way into, learning to advocate for my children as they navigated school with their invisible disabilities. Um, and I got myself into public speaking and educating groups like the CSIS and the Homelessness Secretariat in the government, lots of opportunities to address large crowds about the realities of navigating survival in Canada. And all of those experiences led me to my helper profession and designation as a registered social services worker in Ontario, the Ontario College. And now I'm pursuing my master's in social work as well in the University of Toronto. And very exciting things happening professionally and personally for me. It's been a long, long, long journey. But what that advocacy work and those lived experiences, I think what tends to get me invited to, cool things like this, has been the work that I've done with the Indigenous Death Doula Collective. Prior to that, as I wrapped up my university degree in sociology at Carleton, I helped launch Aunties on the Road Full Spectrum Doula Collective, which was a group offering reproductive health supports to Indigenous youth 12 and up, from everything under the sun as well. So, and that I'm very proud that doula collective is still in operation today in my ancestral Algonquin territory. And really, what happened for myself was I had a huge shift with family members. My grandfather, who's a very important role model for me in my life, and as a caregiver, he took great pride in his work ethic and caring for his entire family, um, carrying that legacy on when he was coping with cancer. And then beating cancer and then dying of old age. Having these experiences led me to death work. And it's been a heck of a journey, but a lot of what I have made my heart work has been creating what I haven't been able to find. So that's been creating Indigenous specific, First Nation specific um, training opportunities, learning resources. I was really fortunate in my undergrad to connect with someone who became a good friend of mine, Jenna Klosterman, and she was wrapping up her sociological master's project on the limits of care. And so I was able to be part of that project that Jana did, and it would eventually lead to a fantastic book called At the Limits of Care. And it's something that I think we have to think about as people who are born into caregiving work. There is in the inevitable burnout. There is the inevitable point where we can only offer so much care. And when we look at systems that are not only not aiding this, they're actually hindering our ability to offer care. They're actually creating scenarios where we're choosing to walk away from care work as a means of self-preservation. These are important things that we need to be talking about. And so that's why this panel is so exciting. Um, so thinking about those limits of care and also the excellent role modeling that my grandparents did for me and their work ethic, creating the Indigenous Death Doula training program was really an important social bomb, I think, that really resonated with a lot of people right at the outset of the pandemic. And uh, what has really come out of all of that is now we need to find a way to support the people who are coming up and showing up to do this work. Economically, from top to bottom, we are penalized for trying to take on this work, whether we're sole proprietors who are not technically entrepreneurs or something like we're not technically a small business till we have a single employee or something, to, the high taxation of our incomes, where so many of us are doing work that's unpaid while fighting for work that is paid. And, the days of these fantastic lifetimes that have resulted in a place where you have the means and the ability to pay for your care, to pay for your, end of life legacy planning, those days are fading with the aging generation. Uh, the biggest work that my death doulas encounter is how do we honor this person with absolutely zero money? How do we care for this person without any family, without any wealth to draw from? And you know what? Communities are making it happen. We have no choice but to figure it out. So that's what we're doing. But it's been a real honor to meet the caregivers who have answered the call. And it's been nurturing spiritually, emotionally, physically, every way possible that you can think of, to be able to continuously repeat the message that we must honor our caregivers. We must return value to our caregivers. And above all else, we have to recognize that caregivers are the legs that our communities are standing on. And if we can't get that sorted out, I hate to think of what future generations are going to be facing. It's scary enough now. So on the more positive side, I'd love to just end this on a call out for folks to start asking your leadership to consider caregivers as skilled trade workers. In the Ontario ministry, we have trades that are upheld and honored, and it's been a long time thought of mine that caregivers should be recognized as tradespeople, in some kind of way to plug into the infrastructure that already exists, um, for Indigenous artisans and Indigenous daycare providers. Those are listings that are listed on trade approved, titles. Caregiver is not a far reach, and I think it would be fairly easy to move forward in that way. So, um, thank you so much. I will wrap it up there. Chimigwech again for the invitation, Nancy, and to be in such fine company.
Mm. Thank you so much, Crystal. I love that idea. Every time I read about more women in the trades, I'm going to think of that, and that's my rebuttal right there. I love it. Love, love, love it. Thank you so much. Um, Janice, I'm looking forward to hearing from you as well. I know I'm not alone in facing aging parents and discussions about what that might look like, and even what that discussion might look like.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm so excited. I'm Janice Goldmintz, and my company is Talk About Aging. It's because we don't. It's become a taboo subject. It's like if we don't talk about it, it won't be real. We won't have to think about it. And so what happens is then we end up in crisis. And then we're not prepared. We don't know what to do. We don't know what our parents or loved ones would want. And so we scramble. A little bit about me, and then I'll kind of get into what I do. I have a background in gerontology, which is the study of aging. But I think that my biggest learning came from caring for both of my parents who had Alzheimer's disease at different times. And as much as I learned in school, it does not always apply in reality. And I would bet that in this group of women, a lot of you are either facing aging parents, will face aging parents, or have faced aging parents. And we're not taught. We're not taught what to do and how to do it and how to make that fit into our lives. And that really is part of my mission. Um, my view here when it comes to work is I'm looking at how does caregiving affect work life. Companies are not yet quite aware of things that are happening in their with their staff that might be related to caregiving. They just see things like people are distracted, they're in a meeting and they're looking at their phone, or they look like they're not concentrating, or their productivity has changed, or they're asking for time off. And companies are not yet putting one and one together and getting two. In the US, $50 billion a year is lost in turnover, lost productivity, and absenteeism due to caregiving. And in the UK, 600 people a day quit their jobs because they cannot balance caregiving and working. So this is a huge problem that is not being addressed. You know, those women are sitting there and they're worried about their parents, their safety, and are they getting their medications, and what is their family doing? And uh, a crisis hits, and they don't know, should I be concentrating on my work meeting, or do I need to go and run to my parents? And a lot of this is because we don't prepare, because we don't have those conversations, because we don't sit down and go to, ask our parent, what if, what would you want? I have a booklet that I created for family visits. So around the holidays, especially, because not everybody gets the opportunity to sit down with their parents, but to look for certain red flags and just to look for certain things, to think, do I need to be concerned about my parents? And I don't blame organizations. This isn't something that they're taught to think about. HR is thinking about the things that they normally think about. Management is saying this employee seems to be having struggles or whatever, and that gets addressed on a sort of corporate level. But what really needs to be looked at is the why. And again, that's not something that we are generally trained in figuring out, that why. We just make assumptions. We just go by sort of corporate speak, because what we're interested in as an organization is profitability and sustainability. And when we see that our employees are struggling, we don't always have the language to say what's going on. There are ways of changing things, and that's really what I'm hoping to be able to do, is to bring this to light to organizations. I've said to many people, do you have people that work for you that are caregiving for their parents? No. I said, if you have people here who are between 40 and 60, you do. You're just not aware. A lot of corporate cultures make it not safe in some ways to talk about that personal impact. People will say, I have a doctor's appointment, not I need to go with my parent. Because to say it's for me, that's logical. And even if it's for your child, that's become much more acceptable to have childcare as a reason for distraction. But we're not yet there to have it be our parent that is the one that's causing the distraction. And the thing is, a lot of people had children when they were older. So their kids are in their 40s and 45 when the parent is starting to show that aging. And so you may be mid-career, and now you're thinking to yourself, am I able to take that promotion? Because I know, I got my parents over here and I got my kids over here, and I don't know if I have the bandwidth to care for my parents and my children and work and. And so all those balls are up in the air and we're not sure how to manage them. What I really think needs to be done is to start again opening those conversations, that people start going to their places of employment and saying, hey, this is what's going on. I'm struggling. What a lot of companies will do is say, oh, we have, employee assistance programs. But in my view, that's a little bit too late down the road because people are already burning out. If these conversations are had earlier down the road, then you can catch these things. You can help prepare the company and the staff member to be able to better manage what is going to happen down the road, because it is, have opportunities to have people like me come in and speak and talk about how do you have the conversation with your family. How does everybody sit down and go, all right, mom, dad, what would you like? Okay, I can do finance. I can do medical appointments. Let's put a plan together and see what we can do. Oh, does everybody know who the doctors are, who the lawyers are, all of these things that are so important to have documented, but we don't do it. And so a crisis hits and we're scrambling. In an ER and a doctor says, do you want a DNR? And first of all, people are like, what the hell is a DNR? And what would my parent want? And so we're making decisions under crisis, under emotional stress, that makes it even more difficult. Now, think about that while you're in your work situation and you get a text that says, Mom fell, and trying to figure out, how do I tell my workplace, I got to go because my mother just fell. So these are all things that I think we need to be looking at. I would, venture to guess that there are people on this call who have faced those things, or whose companies you may be, hesitant to say, this is what is happening for me. But I really think this is an opportunity for us to start opening those conversations with our families, with our workplaces, even with the government, to be more aware that this is going to be a huge problem, even in terms of how we're going to have government services be available to help us better care for our parents. There are certain things. I know the government is working on things like opening more long-term cares and more at-home services, but they are sadly not adequate. I will tell you, when my mother had Alzheimer's and my dad was looking for respite care, they said you can have 50 hours a year. That's 1 hour a week of respite care. And I just thought this is crazy. When I started looking at the number of long-term care beds that people were waiting for, 8 years ago, there was 19,000 people on the list. Now there's 55,000. So there's, anything that we can do to make the government more aware of what our seniors need so that we can be in those places we need to have our career, to have our kids, to care for our parents, and have a balanced life. So if there's any message that I can leave you with, is if you are in this situation, please have the conversation within your families. Start to open that up, even if it's just to say, hey, what would you want? What could we do? What if? Do you have powers of attorney? Do you have wills? Start to get these things in place, because it's going to make it so much easier down the road. Thanks for allowing me to share that part of me, and I'm really appreciative to Nancy and to the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susie, Crystal, Janice, for your expertise and your deeply personal perspectives. I think what's especially powerful about today's discussion is that although you all come from different sectors, whether it's the arts, healthcare, indigenous knowledge systems, community care, aging, and elder care, all your work centers ultimately around care. And once again, it just speaks to the core message of this call that care is not a niche issue. It's not tied to one industry. It touches every sector, it touches every community, and it touches every stage of life. So thank you again so much for coming on our call and sharing your perspectives, your experience. Now I want to really bring and invite all our attendees to share their experiences with caregiving, either paid or unpaid. I think it's important to share our stories, and I really want you to take advantage to CanWCC space. It is considered a space, and we also welcome a couple questions. But first off, I know we do have one volunteer. Her name is Sydney Condris. Would you just like to start?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sydney Condris. I work in the film and television industry. I am a script supervisor, which is a department of one person. I work very closely with the director and actors on set. So my role is quite integral to being a part of the long at minimum 12-hour days that we do when we are hired. I'm a gig worker. I do not work for one particular company. I work for multiple studios. So I am in a very unique market where I'm bouncing around a lot and I am at the mercy of my work life more than anything else. And I'm gonna share my story about my mother, who's also here today. Um, Before I became a union worker, I was an independent contractor, and I've been script supervising for about 15 years, so this is earlier on in my career, but sort of in the middle. And she ended up getting sick with stage 4 colon cancer to our surprise. She had very little symptoms, so we had no idea. And just speaking to our last speaker's note about like starting these conversations, I I mean, I wish we had started those conversations because it came out of nowhere and it shocked all of us. And when she got sick, she had to do surgeries and chemotherapy, and which were both very extremely traumatic and invasive, and completely changed the dynamic of our family. And in order for me to support her properly, I couldn't take work anymore. And she was also um, has her own business as well, and she needed to keep working as well. Thankfully, like over the years as a kid, she had hired me to do various jobs in her business, so I was a little prepared to help her out. But what ended up happening was I took a year off work, unpaid. Thankfully, once again in my industry, like I had enough of a savings to be able to do that, and I took care of her to the point where when she was in ICU, I made a deal with all the nurses that they would let me sleep there overnight. I bribed them with cookies and donuts and stuff like that. And I slept there every night. And so that I could be at the morning meeting with the doctors at 6 a.m. with their students and the residents there. And so that I could be taking notes because what happens in hospitals is you get new doctors every day. And sometimes the information isn't shared as thoroughly as you'd hope it to be. So I, as a professional note taker, as a script supervisor, I knew exactly how to do this. So I was there every single morning to take notes. And in my advocacy, I really believe helped get her out of there within a week, which was miraculous. She was in an induced coma. That's how intense it was. And And because, and then post that, she did chemo, which made her sicker and sicker and sicker. And so then I ended up having to also then support her work life. So I stopped working and then I started taking over her work duties while taking care of her, simultaneously cooking meals, doing medicine runs, taking her to doctor's appointments, chemo treatment, and answering her phones, emails, and producing an entire award show one year on her behalf. And through that time, I I didn't even know that I could, or I didn't even think about like, oh, I wish there was more support for me in this scenario. I wish there was something that could help me here because there really wasn't anything. I'm a gig worker. I made this choice in life. And um and it really had a tremendous, not just financial effect on me, but a psychological effect on me, so that when she did become better, we were all elated. And then I sort of was overcome with the traumatic emotions that were associated with it. And so I had a new hurdle after she got better and I could go back to work. I then had to go back to work dealing with all this traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder from it. And I had no support there either. And just hearing these everyone speaking and how important it is to create these policies and have these conversations and and have these like group talks, it really helps. Like, I mean, at work, I even tell my stories to people about this so that they can start thinking about it if and when it happens. And like, I'm a millennial, and boomers, my mom's a baby boomer and one of the largest populations right now, and they're aging. And I'm the second largest population, and we're going to be taking care of them. And we have no support system in place to do that while living a balanced life. So I just really appreciate hearing these topics and having these conversations. I'm I've been making notes like crazy, and I really appreciate everyone here today. And thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Sydney. You said your mom is here, and I think she can definitely, you know, address the fact that she is very lucky to have a daughter like you and for sacrificing all that you did for her during her time. I'm looking at the chat and I'm not seeing anybody. Is
I
anybody?
could
Oh,
I could respond as
go
Sydney's
ahead.
mother if you'd like.
Uh, Go ahead.
Okay. I can't tell you how amazing it was for me to have my family at my side, and I was the executive director of the Canadian Society of Cinematographers, and luckily, those people kept me on full salary while I was ill, which was just remarkable. And I did a lot of my work from my bed with my assistant sitting with me on my bed and Sydney running back and forth because she produced the Canadian Cinematography Award show, which is just a massive job. And without it, I would have been screwed, you know. And it was, besides all the work that Sydney did when she was not sleeping at the hospital, and after her meeting with the doctors, my other family members came in, and so I was never alone, ever, at the hospital or at home at any time. They all, every single one of them, my son, my daughter-in-law, Sydney, her partner Lucas, who was soon to be my son-in-law, and my husband, they all took turns looking after me. It was remarkable. And without that kind of support, it would have been disastrous. And there are not too many people who would be in those circumstances. Not too many people to be as lucky as I was. And, you know, it was, as Sydney said, quite a traumatic thing for everybody to go through. And it was 9 years ago, and lucky me, I'm still here. I'm cancer free after 9 years. So, and besides the amazing doctors, it was my family who kept me alive. So, thanks to my daughter, and that's the story from my point of view.
Thank you so much, Susan, for stepping in. I know Nancy has a story she wanted to share. Do you want to?
Yeah. So I have a couple different stories, but the thing that came to mind when I was preparing for this is I have a group of friends from high school, so we've known each other now for over 30 years. And when we get together, there's sort of a rhythm to our chats, at the pub or in the backyard on the patio. We go around and we do the usual update. What's going on? What's going on with work? What's going on with your partner, whatever. And over the past maybe 5 to 7 years, uh, well, over the past, let's say 15 years, there's been an add-on of a children section. And now we've added on another section, which is how are your parents doing? And what's going on with that? And that section has gotten, that has taken over more and more of the time because it kind of dominates how work is going. It dominates, how your relationship is going. It dominates a lot of the other topics. And I'm so lucky to have these women in my life who I know so, so well because I met them, when I was just coming up as a teenager and I was able to meet, some ride or die friends, I guess is the phrase. But the things that we talk about, like these experiences are so like visceral, like the fear that we feel, the like uncertainty where seeing your parent um, in a way that you've never seen them before, seeing them looking frail and ill, kind of makes you feel so frightened and um, worried about whether you can kind of take on that caretaking um, role between the two of you, like that fear of that dynamic changing and not ever changing back, you know? Uh, it's a bit of you have to grieve a little bit of the loss of the dynamic of being taken care of by your mom or your dad as they grow older, and you notice that you're now taking care of them. And then I find myself kind of thinking, well, who's taking care of me? And nobody's really taking care of me anymore. And I guess that's the way things go, but it's a bit of an existential bummer, to be honest. And it's a little bit bleak sometimes. And so yeah, those are some of the conversations I have with my friends, and I'm so lucky to have friends to have those conversations, but they're they're heavy, you know?
I I want to say that, Nancy, the work that CanWCC has done to prepare, to persuade the government to take on care work as a strategy and all of the numbers and the investment and the return on investment and using infrastructure as a way to invest capital in care and why that has to happen and why it's so important to the economy, that everybody who's spoken in this group today is the bricks and mortar of why that is so important. Like it's living, it's dying, it's breathing, it's eating, it's surviving. It is the most elemental aspect of who we are as people, as citizens, as workers. And if we could, and coming up through the women's movement, it doesn't shock me that women's experience is not considered to be important. But this is the experience. This is the pinnacle of experience. And so, how I feel by hearing everybody speak, and Crystal, I honestly thought I was going to choke. I was choking up as you were speaking. And Sid and Susan, too, who are friends, the same. But this is the bricks and the mortar. This is the weapons. These are the arrows in our, like, what is quiver? This is where we move the ball forward with the people and the stories that make up the care economy, if we want to use that word, that lumps everything together and it's kind of baffling to most people. But the stories, the elemental stories, our stories and your stories, is really what is going to propel this movement forward. And we can do a letter writing campaign. And we should do a letter writing campaign. We should do a petition. We should do everything we can possibly do to support this piece of work that CanWCC has done for the Major Projects Office. But they need to be banged over the head with the freaking reality of people's lives, right? That's what they need to be thrown on their fucking desks. Like the numbers are there. They add up. That is an incredible document for some people who haven't read it cover to cover. It's an amazing document. But what moves the needle is the lives of people. And if MPs have to sit down in their constituency office and listen to the stories that were just told in this past hour, that is just a tiny representation of it. This is how we move mountains, ladies, women, friends. And this is where we start. Things have to start somewhere. And if this is where we start, then this is where we start. Because we have a righteous cause. We have a noble cause. We are on the right side of humanity here. And when I listen to your stories, I think, what's oil and gas got to do with it anyway? So I just wanted to say how impactful that all was for me, and how, it wasn't like I needed a bit of extra fuel in my tank, but oh my God, I'm overflowing with fuel now. Like nothing is going to feel like it's going to stop me on a mission now. And so thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for bearing your souls. I'm so grateful that you did. Thank you very much.
Couple of things. Sydney, your story about caring for your parent, it's so important to have an advocate when there's a hospitalization. For whatever reason, and it doesn't matter if the person is older or younger or your own age, it's just the way that our medical care goes these days, and especially somebody who cannot speak for themselves, somebody who is older and might have dementia or other cognitive issues where they cannot speak for themselves, or they have white coat syndrome where they're afraid to ask for what it is they need or for understanding. So what your example is so amazing and needed. And again, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is what we need to be doing to be caring for our loved ones. And Nancy, what I talk about with people is it time to parent your parents? And that's a really hard transition. And it's very difficult to think, oh my God, these people who took care of me, now the role is reversed. And there's friction there on both sides. Do I want to insert my information on my parents? And as a parent, do I want my kids telling me now what to do? So it's a very hard edge to try and navigate. But again, having conversations within the family and looking at safety issues and things like that, there are ways to know when it's necessary and when it's not necessary. What I tell people is sometimes your parents are going to want to do things that you don't think are in their best interest, and that doesn't matter. They still get to choose for themselves, make their own mistakes, unless it is a life and death safety issue kind of a thing. So I think that's really important. Just a little story that I had when I was thinking about work and caregiving. I was working for somebody, and my mother was calling me every 10 minutes. My mother had dementia every 10 minutes. I can't talk to you, Mom. I'm at work. 10 minutes later, call back, call back, call back. And I thought I was going to go out of my mind because she just kept calling and calling and calling. And I thought about it, and then this went on and on. And then there came a day where my mother could not use the phone anymore. And then there was no calls. And that was just as devastating as having those calls because I knew now I was never going to get that call again, even though it was disruptive. That's a whole other stage and progression. So again, nobody teaches us, we learn. And the other thing, Nancy, that's amazing is that you have this group of friends and that you get to talk to each other and that you are open and say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. Can you help me? Can you support me? Even if it's just say, I'm here to listen to you. It's so important to have that support system. And, any way that you can nurture that, that's the best thing to do.
Hi, everybody. I'm really delighted to be in this conversation, and thank you so much for CanWCC for hosting it, and of course, the brilliant initiative around thinking of the care economy as an important piece of infrastructure. We kind of know that capitalism is held up by free care, let alone paid care. So I just wanted to share two things. One is just quickly my own story around that. My mother developed ALS at 55, which was kind of young. I was 35, 36 at the time. So none of my friends were going through any of this. And that back in the 90s, I was pretty much a person around town. I was President McGraw-Hill Ryerson and also before that in New York. So, living the career life. And when my mother called to say I have ALS, and she was living alone, she didn't have a husband or anything like that. And so I came back, I moved in with her, and she was a chain smoker. The chaos that of someone trying to manage a big career and care for their mother at the same time with, very little caregiving support. There were the VNs, they were great. There was the hospice, that was all great. But for 2 years, it was huge to the point of, for my own story, personal collapse after death. It all, people write about these things. It's all comes crashing down. And it took me a few years to recover from that. I ended up leaving my corporate life and starting a cheese factory. That's a whole other thing. But part of the purpose of it was to give myself more control and more breathing space for life itself, not just work. And I think people call that balance. And I personally have a thing about the word balance. I don't think it's balance. I think that is work. Like I would rather we had to have paid work and unpaid work instead of balance and unbalance. Because all life is work if we value all kinds of work. Anyway, my second comment was something I want to follow up with in the chat. I do listen, as I'm sure you do, to a lot of economic forecasts and podcasts and things like that to see where the economy is going. If you're an entrepreneur, self-employed, with many of you are, you probably do the same thing. I am increasingly disturbed to hear people talking about how if in a time of cost savings, we really need to figure out how to roll back things for seniors because seniors are holding things back. Most of you know that pension monies for people who don't have big, savings or corporate pensions or public pensions is pretty dire. You might end up with maybe $2,000 a month to live. And I can't believe I'm hearing on top of all of this, a conversation that says that pensioners are a drain on our economy. And I think we need to be listening to those whispers too, and be fighting back that narrative, which seems to be taking root in some places. So anyways, thank you for the work. Thanks for the opportunity to chat.
Thank you, Petra and Gail and Janice and Susan. And I'm forgetting one person, apologies, Sydney, for speaking up and talking about your personal experiences. Before we end the call, I just want to invite our speakers, Crystal, Susie, and Janice again to have one last remark before we say goodbye.
Okay, yeah. So this is Susie Burpee of Balancing Act, and I guess I want to. When we were speaking on the pre-call, there was a question about like what gives us hope, and
Mhm.
so I thought I just wanted to sort of like Nancy did, give a shout out to other organizations who are working, alongside this work. So of course, there's Childcare Now, Childcare Resource and Research Unit and Building Blocks for Care, who are fighting to keep what childcare gains we have won. It's precarious, and the $10 a day thing is not solid. And this is a piece of that economy. I also want to celebrate the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. Nancy spoke to the National All Party Caregiving Caucus, which exists. And these MPs are interested in fighting for better care supports at a policy level. The CCCE released a Caring in Canada report about 2 weeks ago, which is really worth a read and aligns completely with the CanWCC's MPO project. I also want to give a shout out to Moms at Work, Alison Venditti, and some really fierce uh, advocacy for.
I think Susie's having some issues with her connection. Crystal, do you want to go for it?
Sure. Again, just wanting to thank everyone for joining us today, and it's really difficult conversation to have because it's so personal. And when we look around at the care ecosystem and the different ways and bodies that are contributing to the care of our families, top to bottom, birth to death, we know right now that in Ontario there's developmental service workers on strike. We know that our teachers are constantly going on strike. We know that a lot of the care ecosystem is not working. And I think that final thought, that final call to action is to think radically and boldly. Maybe it's supporting those caregivers as skilled trade workers. Maybe it's thinking up new solutions that have never been tried before. So that's my hope for the future. Let's get radical, let's get funky, let's get punk rock with it, and hopefully we'll have some better outcomes as a result. So, chimigwech, everyone.
What gives me hope is this kind of a forum that caregiving has become part of what's up in the forefront. That has not happened before. I'm seeing it a lot more in other articles and posts and things that are putting a spotlight on this very important subject. The other thing is, as the baby boomers are aging, I can assure you that they are not going to go quietly into the good night. Baby boomers have always been outspoken, and I trust that this is not going to stop just because they're getting older. There will be a higher demand for better medical care, better government programs, all of that kind of thing. And so I have hope for that. And I have hope for the next generation behind me, like my daughter and son's generation, who have watched, hopefully, people like me take care of my parents so that they learned this is what you do. This is how you do it. And what I want to tell people is if you are not the right person to do it for your parent, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no, when people say they're obligated, there is no obligation. it has to come from general, your love and caring. As long as your parent is taken care of, it doesn't matter if it's you or if it's a family member or if it's somebody that you hire, as long as they're taken care of, because not every family has, that positive dynamic or the ability for that person to be able to do it. We don't all live in the same city as our parents, so that there's lots of challenges, but I do have hope that we're going to make this much more out there. We're going to talk about aging.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you to our incredible panelists. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today. I do want to clear one thing up because I was asked, why is the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce the one taking this on? Well, in Canada, women perform the majority of both paid and uncare work. And whether that's what we discussed today, raising children, supporting aging parents, working in healthcare, building community supports, or caring for all invisible labor or the majority invisible labor that keeps a household and workplaces running every day. So these essential works or which is care continues to be obviously undervalued in economic policy, infrastructure, planning, and public investment. So that is why CanWCC has decided to take that on because we advocate for women's economic equity, which means advocating for systems that make economic participation in the first place possible. So we invite you to continue the conversation elsewhere, wherever, with your friends, with your colleagues, with your partners. Share CanWCC's Canada's Missing Major Project campaign, which is coming up. Help us advocate for a future where care is recognized and invested in essential infrastructure. Keep just in mind that more information is coming. Nancy spoke about it. We are getting ready to get this petition out there. And until then, keep the conversation going. And thank you again so much for being part of today's call.